How do companies that use a job order costing system use this normal costing methodology? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify all of your different cost objects. We're just going to do these steps for one. Once you've identified your cost objects, you can begin a 7-step process to record and determine the cost of each individual unique job that you've done during the period. So our job is going to be that Wilson Brothers Homes is going to construct a wooden storage shed, and they're going to do so for ABC suppliers. Usually they have some kind of shorthand thing because it's a lot of work to say, yeah, we're building this shed for ABC suppliers. So you have a very succinct way to label your jobs. This job is going to be labeled ABC002. We need to take the costs that go into production and record them specifically for this job. And the first step of doing that is requisition forms. When you need materials to work on a job, they're typically held in a big storage facility. When you go to grab those materials to use in production, you need to tell somebody and you make a record that you are taking these materials out of the storage facility and putting them into use for this specific job. And that way you can track directly the cost of those materials to the job that you're working on. So here we're going to start job ABC002 by having one of our employees, Joe Smith, on January 1st requisition 20 12-foot 2x4s. Each part has some kind of shorthand label for it. This is part number 100, and these 2x4s originally cost $2.50 a piece. These are going to get used for the ABC company job, so we're going to assign these costs to job ABC002. This is going to be recorded as requisition number 1 during the period, and these materials are going to be issued by Jane Doe. So when you go to grab materials from storage, it has to be signed not only by the person who's receiving them, but also by the person who's taking them out of storage and handing them over to you. It's like a double system checks and balances to make sure that everything is going to where it's supposed to be going. So let's fill out this requisition form. This is rec number 1. It is occurring on January 1st of 20XX, and this is being requisitioned for that ABC company job building that shed, which is ABC002. What is being requisitioned? Part number 100, which is 2x4x12 lumber, and the quantity being requisitioned is 20. Those 20 12-foot 2x4s originally cost Wilson Brothers $2.50 a piece to acquire, which means the total cost basis of the materials being requisitioned for production in job ABC002, 20 times 250, is 50. These were issued by Ms. Jane Doe on January 1st of 20XX, and they were received by the employee that went to requisition in the first place, Joe Smith, on that same date. So that is how material costs are tracked. Every time somebody goes, they have to fill out one of these forms for the parts they're receiving, and to also know what specific job we should be assigning these costs to. Labor is another thing that's directly traceable, and when employees punch in, they have some kind of system. Nowadays it's usually a touchscreen that says what job you're working on. That way they know how many hours should be assigned to each job. So here, during this first week of January, Mr. John Wilson is going to work on 2 different jobs for Wilson Brothers Homes. It's not like companies have just one job and they do them all the way through to the end. They usually have multiple jobs going on at once. So you might have employees bounce around. Well, it's fine. You have a very easy way to track how many hours were used on one job versus another. So Mr. Wilson here, he worked on the ABC company job for 8 hours a day, Monday through Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday for his 8-hour shift. He got pulled to work on an unrelated job, which is XYZ002. Mr. Wilson makes $20 per hour. Every employee has an employee number. His is 001-21, and his labor time record for this period is going to be LT003, basically the 3rd paycheck they've had to process during the period. Let's fill out a labor time sheet to account for all the hours that Mr. Wilson worked. Well, this is labor time record LT003. Employee's name is John Wilson, who has the employee number of 001-21. Mr. Wilson, as our information has told us, makes $20 per hour, and we are making this labor time sheet for the first week of January, so that would begin January 1st, 20XX, and end January 6th, 20XX. Mr. Wilson worked on 2 jobs during the week. The first one was the job that we're going to keep following through, ABC002, the shed for ABC suppliers. He worked on this job for 8 hours a day on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So in total, during the week, Mr. John Wilson spent 24 hours working on job ABC002. On Thursday and Friday, he worked on job XYZ002 for his 8-hour shift for a total of 16, which is how Mr. Wilson's 40-hour work week, there we go, was spread out. His supervisor's name is Mike Jones, and his supervisor is going to approve this labor timesheet on January 6, 20XX, the end of the week. So now we know when we're assigning out costs to the different jobs that 24 hours worth of labor has to go to job ABC002 for Mr. Wilson, and the other 16 hours worth of labor has to go to job XYZ002. So that is the two direct cost components. Those are very easy to trace. By using requisitions and by using labor timesheets, you know how much direct materials and direct labor you have to put in every single job that you have. Just go through, reference these two records, and you will be able to figure out how much cost should be accumulated in each specific job. But some jobs, or some costs that go into jobs, can't be as easily traced, and that is when we're going to have our indirect pool. First thing you should do is have some kind of methodology that says this is how we intend to spread out our indirect costs to all the different jobs. And because they are Wilson Brother Homes, they manufacture stuff out of wood. It's a very, very labor intensive process. They're going to use direct labor hours as their driver. Essentially saying that the more labor hours it takes to do a job, the more indirect cost that job is causing us to incur. Well, now that we have our driver, we have to make two estimates. The first being, what amount of indirect costs do we expect to incur during the period based on what we normally have to pay for these each and every period. And then secondly, how many total units of the driver, in this case, how many total direct labor hours are we expecting to incur, again, based on what normally happens within our business. So ABC Company is going to estimate the following. They're going to estimate that indirect labor costs, the cost of their custodians and their production supervisors, etc., is going to be $22,000 for the period. The cost of indirect materials, wood glue, screws, etc., is going to be $14,000 for the period. Rent expense, it should be pretty consistent. That doesn't vary much, so they're pretty confident that $40,000 rent expense they have is correct. Depreciation, they might use some kind of variable depreciation method like units of production. They're going to estimate the depreciation expense for the period across all jobs is going to be $20,000, and insurance is usually pretty fixed as well. So they're going to make a guess. They don't really need to make a guess. They're pretty sure that insurance is going to cost $16,000 during the period. We add up those 5 indirect cost categories. We come up with total expected or budgeted indirect costs of $112,000. So we have the estimate on the total amount of indirect costs we have. We're going to put those indirect costs into the different jobs that we are doing based upon our driver. So we also need to make an estimate of how many direct labor hours it's going to take to complete all jobs for the period. And ABC Company's estimate is it's going to take 28,000 direct labor hours in total to complete all of the jobs that they have. Not just job ABC002, but the tons and tons of jobs that this company has going on in total during January or during this year. So now that we have an expected amount of indirect costs in total, and we have an expected amount of the driver in total, we can come up with our predetermined overhead allocation rate, or our budgeted allocation rate. And to do so, all you need to do in step 5 of these 7 steps to using the normal costing system is to take your expected indirect costs, divide it by your expected quantity of the driver, and you get your allocation rate. So since they're expecting $112,000 in costs, they're expecting to spend 28,000 labor hours to do all the jobs during the period. 112,000 divided by 28,000 is 4. They are saying that we are going to incur $4 of indirect costs in total for every hour that our laborers work. Therefore, for every hour it takes, labor hour it takes to do a job, we should also be saying that job costs us an additional $4 in indirect costs. And now, with this allocation rate, we can figure out how much money we're going to take out of our manufacturing overhead pool, our indirect cost accumulation pool, and spread out the job based upon how many labor hours that job takes. So, what amount are we going to allocate to this specific job? Well, we already saw that John Wilson worked 24 hours on this job ABC002, in that labor time record we had a few slides ago. Let's say another employee named Mr. Brad Ellison is going to work 40 hours. Well, if John Wilson's working 24, and Brad Ellison's working 40, that means those two employees together are going to spend 64 direct labor hours on job ABC002 to finish building the shed. Well, our predetermined overhead allocation rate was $4 per labor hour. So if we are estimating that we're going to incur $4 in indirect costs for every direct labor hour a job takes, and job ABC002 took 64 hours, well, that means that 64 times 4 is 256. We think that it's going to cost $256 in indirect costs to do this job. And now that we have a bunch of cost components going on here that we know for certain, our direct materials and our direct labor, and we've taken our best guess on how much cost should come out of that pool and have to go into that job for the amount of indirect costs we're going to incur during the period, we can come up with the total cost of this job. So for job ABC002, we saw the requisition here on January 1st for lumber, and we put $50 of cost into that job. Well, it takes more than just lumber to build a shed, so you would have things like, shingles, plywood, etc. Let's imagine that's what all these other requisitions are to get all the materials. In total, job ABC002 required us to requisition $560 worth of materials out of storage. That's going to be the direct material cost component of this job. For direct labor, we had Mr. Wilson's labor time ticket, which had 24 hours on it, making $20 an hour. That means he's made $480 working on this job. We had Mr. Ellison from earlier, who worked 40 hours on this job. He only makes $18 an hour. 40 times 18 means that Mr. Ellison made $720 during the period working on this job. And in total, those two laborers combined to make $1,200. And then lastly, we allocated $256 of overhead costs to this job, based upon the predetermined overhead allocation rate of $4 per direct labor hour and the actual quantity of the allocation base that we use, direct labor hours, 64. 64 times 4 is 256. And in total, this job cost $560 plus $1,200 plus $256, a total of $2,016 was this company's cost to complete the shed for ABC suppliers.